One of the biggest points of confusion that I've come across when folks ask me questions is the difference between the channel volume parameter and the master parameter inside amp models on the Helix and HX Stomp. It is very important to understand the difference between these if we hope to finally reach our goals of what we're trying to achieve with a particular tone. Let's start with the channel volume. The channel volume is simply going to be a control over the output volume of this particular amp block. It is not going to alter the tone that we've created. It's not going to change the frequency. It's not going to add or subtract distortion characteristics. It's simply an output volume. So if we want to just simply make the tone we've already dialed in louder or softer, we would use the channel volume. We would not use the master, and we're going to discuss that in just 1 second. One thing to keep in mind, though, is potentially when we do raise or lower the channel volume of the output on the amp block, that is changing the output level of what's coming out of this amp block. So if we have any non-linear blocks after it, such as a compressor, the fact that we're sending a different level of output out of that amp block can potentially affect what is happening in one of those blocks after it. So that's something we want to keep in mind, but beyond the scope of today's discussion. So the channel volume is simply going to be to set our output volume. It will not change our tone. The master control absolutely will. The master control is actually going to control the amount of power amp or power tube distortion we get from our amp model. And again, this is very dependent on the amp model. Each amp is going to react very different. Some don't even have master volumes, and this is just set on 10. But in general, what we are talking about with most amp models is this is going to adjust the power amp distortion. So by bringing it to lower settings, we're going to have less of this power amp distortion. So you can really see this clearly. If I just set this, and I'm on my Brit 2203 model here, if I set this to 5, we already know the drive control basically controls the preamp distortion. So we have a little bit of drive there. If I crank this drive up, we get a lot more drive. That is from the preamp section. But if I bring this quite low and get a fairly clean tone, watch what happens when we crank the master up. We get a different style of overdrive. That's because we're now pushing those virtual power tubes into saturation. This can be a very desirable type of overdrive. If I bring both drive and master lower and bring the channel volume up to compensate, you see how clean this gets. So the master is going to affect our tone in a great way. It's definitely going to add or subtract overdrive, again, depending on the amp model, but it may have other effects on the general tonal quality of what we have. So we're going to have to play with this. But if our goal is to simply raise or lower the volume of our preset without affecting our tone, we would not want to touch our master. Once we have that dialed into where we want it, we want to leave the master alone. And if we simply need more or less output level coming out of that block, we would use our channel volume. So I hope that clears up the confusion a lot of folks have in the difference between the channel volume and the master, and I hope that that helps you to be able to dial in your tones more effectively and in a quicker fashion. I'm going to leave you today with some music of a preset I have available at the Line 6 Marketplace. Link is below if you're so inclined and want to grab it. I hope you enjoy the music on the way out, and I hope that that was helpful.